Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I think we have a few more folks that are still making their way into the conference room, so we'll give them a few minutes to catch up, but we'll get started here shortly. All right, I think everybody's here that will be attending. Let's get started. So welcome everyone to Ask the Expert. My name is John L. Imperio-Lagabon, and I'm the Engagement Manager here at Burdock Group. Before we get into our Q&A, I wanted to give a brief background on our company and a little bit about what we can do for you. As many of you know, we're an ingredient safety and regulatory firm that has been helping food, dietary supplement, and animal feed companies for over 30 years. We've helped clients with label reviews, claims guidance, safety assessments, study protocol review and management, risk assessments, as well as NDINs, FAPs, and of course, GRAS. This afternoon's event is a live Q&A where you will get the opportunity to receive answers to your unique questions on the dietary supplement regulatory space. Thank you to those of you who have already submitted your questions. If you think of a question during the event, please submit it through our questions tab on the GoToWebinar sidebar, and we will do our best to provide an answer today. However, if we can't get to it today, please follow up with us on info@burdockgroup.com, and we will answer the question via email. As always, if you want to speak with one of our experts, we're always available. Now, the gentleman sitting across from me today is a face familiar to many of you. He earned a doctorate in toxicology from Medical College of Virginia within the Virginia Commonwealth University system, and has over 15 years of experience advising clients regarding ingredient safety and regulatory affairs. I'd like to once again welcome Burdock Group's very own Director of Toxicology, Dr. Ray Maltuka. It's good to have you, Ray.
Thank you, John L. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. As you said, I want to give a little bit of overview of what we'll be discussing today, some of the questions, and how I can best address these questions, because they are pertaining towards the U.S. Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act for dietary supplements and those dietary ingredients that go into dietary supplements. I want to focus a little bit more on the regulations surrounding the characterization and the production of dietary ingredients, the notification process, as well as the information and subsequent regulations moving forward that have come in since the Dietary Supplement Education Act, and how those affect the manufacture and the production of dietary supplements and the ingredients. So first off, I want to give a little bit more in terms of the defining aspects of dietary ingredients, dietary supplements, and how FDA looks upon those through the acts, defining aspects, because as usual, you have to define something before you can move forward and discuss it. So in DSHEA, which is the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, DSHEA, a dietary ingredient was defined as any one of the following. Most people know this, but there are some nuances that I'd like to bring out as well. A dietary ingredient is either one of the following: a vitamin, mineral, herb or botanical, amino acid, or it is a dietary substance that is utilized to supplement the diet by increasing total dietary intake, or it's a concentrate, metabolite, constituent, extract, or combination of any of the above ingredients. So that is really necessary to understand how FDA is evaluating things moving forward, and what to expect in the coming months and years in how FDA is looking to revamp potentially the NDIN process. So keep in mind as well, as a new dietary ingredient has to be one that was not marketed in the United States before October 15th, 1994. DSHEA requires that manufacturers and distributors of new dietary ingredients or dietary supplements submit a pre-market notification 70 days prior to marketing that dietary supplement. So that is required unless the new dietary ingredient, which I utilize the acronym NDI, new dietary ingredient, and any other dietary ingredients in the dietary supplement have been present in the food supply as an article used for food in a form in which the food has not been chemically altered. That's kind of key as we move forward to better understand how ingredients that are not found in a notification can already or also be utilized in dietary supplements. So with that, that was my general overview of what we'll be discussing today, as well as some of the manufacturing processes and new regulations connected to what's been going on since DSHEA came in, such as the Food Safety Modernization Act, as well as implementation of the good manufacturing practices that are now correct and current for production of dietary supplements.
Thank you for that, Ray. I think that's a very good summary. It's always good for us to start with a good framework, and I think that really leads to some of the questions that we can really delve into. So if you guys have any questions, please send them in as we move forward. And if you get inspired or have any more questions as we answer these, please, by all means, send it through and we'll get to it as soon as we can. All right, great. Let's get started. First question. Hold on, let me get my mask up. Dietary supplements have been coming to market in food-like forms, for example, gummies, chews, chewable tablets. From a compliance perspective, would it be appropriate to apply the ingredient GRAS affirmation, maximum usage levels listed for the food's candy-like forms, to dietary supplements?
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, so if an ingredient has been concluded as GRAS for use in gummies or other candy-like or other types of product formulations, then those use levels should be maintained for dietary supplements in the same shape or manner in those usage limits. And yes, they should be maintained. FDA has typically stated back and forth, but they've held most generally to the idea that dietary supplement ingredients or dietary ingredients that have been determined GRAS for certain uses can also be utilized in dietary supplements at or below those use levels, those overall use intake levels. So yes, to answer that question, you should maintain those similar use levels.
Absolutely. And I think building on that first question, I think you've answered it quite well, but I think one of the things that they were asking with that is there's an active dietary ingredient with this, but the other ingredients making up that food, like the gummies, I'm sure there's other ingredients in there. As long as they use the same ingredients that meat was used to make the gummies in food form in dietary supplements, it should be okay as long as they're grass, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay.
Anything that goes into the dietary supplement should either be grass for its intended use, such as an excipient or a flow agent or a filler. Those should all be grass if they are not, because most of those are not dietary ingredients, but yet they are allowed to be in dietary supplements because they were in the food supply prior to, in addition to the actual active ingredient, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, I think for lack of a better term, I think that's correct.
Exactly.
So going off that, well, actually taking a little bit to a different term or a different turn, what are core Cgmp regulatory responsibilities of private label dietary supplement retailers and distributors?
Okay.
So who's responsible for this? I think that's, especially for retailing, you're not manufacturing it.
Right, but also it's the core, that's a core good manufacturing practice.
That is correct. What are they responsible for? That's what these sellers, not manufacturers.
All right, so for retailers of dietary supplements, their core good manufacturing practice aspects are relatively minor in terms of the manufacturing of the product, because the retailers, they're just selling the product. So they really don't adhere to good manufacturing practice other than possibly distribution type of things. The distributors, this is where you start running into FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, because that aspect, that does require distributors that can hold products, including dietary supplements, in warehouses to maintain good manufacturing practice on facility grounds, maintenance, and records keeping for the articles that are being sold. Some of those are the core aspects of good manufacturing practice for those distributors. They have to really hold to and maintain those types of record keeping. The facilities maintenance, the maintaining the, let me see, what was the other one that I was thinking of? Facilities.
Stability, is that something?
Not necessarily stability, but the warehousing has to have an ambient temperature maintained, so that to maintain the stability of your ingredients. And it's all record keeping as well. They have to make sure the transport records are also there. So that type of thing, or core good manufacturing practice, to make sure that that is in place.
Okay, I see. It's really to make sure that they keep the quality of that ingredient for the time and the segment of the journey to market that the product has.
Correct, as it goes through the distributor's hands.
Okay, so that is their core responsibility as a distributor.
Exactly.
That's a good summary. I learned something new. All right, now this is a very long-term one. I think it's going to be very interesting.
Okay.
So break this down as much as you can. What is on the horizon for DSHEA 2.0? What is on the horizon to improve the quality of NDINs? Very interesting. Love to hear your opinion on that.
Okay. Definitely, what is on the horizon for DSHEA 2.0? That is a very hot topic right now, obviously, because there's been a lot of questions and a lot of speculation, and much of it does surround CBD,
of course,
cannabinoids, as well as how that will impact looking at dietary supplements. The DSHEA 2.0, I think there is going to be clarification on what is required for to be contained within a notification. Because if you recall, in 2016, FDA did come out with a guidance document on what is expected to be in a new dietary ingredient notification. That was never finalized, and that also had a lot of questions that industry had concerning its content, whether it was required or not, and there's quite a bit of pushback from industry on this.
Mhm.
So I would like to see, and I think that they do need to provide another update to that guidance document,
Yeah.
in which it better streamlines what type of safety information is required for new dietary ingredients, as well as a little bit more in terms of what is thought of concerning chemical alteration.
That's
That
a big
is
one.
a very hot topic because there's a lot of questions going back and forth as where is the line crossed between, well, this is the same thing, but it's not quite. Where is the, okay, this is a clear line of chemical alteration. So that aspect to DSHEA 2.0, I think is going to be coming sooner rather than later because of the questions that arise through warning letters lately, as well as the cannabidiol. The other aspect was, if you
What can we do to improve the quality of NDI?
improve the quality of NDINs, I think it's very much, and FDA has been very clear on this, is the characterization of
Absolutely
the ingredient,
agree.
of the actual new dietary ingredient. That is a stumbling block for a lot of notifications right from the outset. Because keep in mind, from what I've seen, and I'm going to compare this with GRAS notifications versus new dietary ingredient notifications, because you can see a lot of the GRAS notifications on the CEFSAN, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition website, and compare directly to notifications for NDINs. And when I look at those, and what I've worked on is finding that the GRAS dossiers are not as stringent in terms of classification and characterization of the ingredient as FDA wants the new dietary ingredients to be characterized. So for both, you have to characterize what is essentially in 100% of the ingredient. You have to define what is the different proteins, the carbohydrates, other active.
This is for NDIs?
For both.
For both, okay.
For both.
Makes sense.
However, for NDIs, you really have to go and characterize much more detail the origin of the ingredient itself, where it came from, document that, document its name, its nomenclature.
So specific facilities that manufacture it, is that correct?
That as well,
Where
yes.
they were farmed, or any botanical was farmed?
That adds into it, and how that farming was done. Was it according to good agricultural practices? How it was handled? All of that information goes into that, as well as the specifications are necessary for both. So there's a lot of overlap, but I find that the definition and the characterization of the ingredient in a new dietary ingredient notification must be much more detailed. So streamlining that aspect would be helpful. You know, give us a set of documents in terms of saying, this is what you need, as well as, do you really need to know, let's say, who was the actual author that wrote down and defined the genus and species name for this botanical that you're using? Is that really necessary when you're saying, this is the name and here's the synonyms for this botanical?
Yeah.
So if you could streamline that a little bit more, I think that would be less of a stumbling block.
Yeah.
Other streamlining aspects, there's a debate right now as well for utilizing master files within FDA. And I see positives and negatives concerning the use of a master file for the information to be held proprietary for new dietary ingredient notifications. I think if FDA were to streamline whether that is actually a viable path moving forward, or just take it off the table, one or the other. But there's a lot of questionable back and forth. Let's just define it and move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I personally learned a lot from your opinions on that. But before this, I know this isn't one of the questions, but I think a lot of our audience would like to understand a little bit more about the self-GRAS versus NDIN perspective.
Okay.
In a very short, high-level perspective, can you summarize that for us before we move forward? We got to address that.
Sure.
A lot of people want to know.
Sure, and that, let me take a step back as well.
Okay.
Because that opens up the door to what some people in the industry have called the grass loophole.
Yep. Very
And
controversial.
that is the aspect that, as I went through in my opening statement of saying that the ingredients for new dietary or for dietary ingredients must have been a component in the food supply. So with that, the DSHEA Act in and of itself indicated that ingredients or constituents of the food supply can be a part of a dietary ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, and even FDA in their 2016 guidance document, I'll call it a guidance document, indicated that if an ingredient is self-grassed by a company and is put into the food supply for a certain amount of time, it can then go into a dietary supplement without the notification. It's still considered a new dietary ingredient. It just doesn't have to go through the notification process.
The NDI process.
The NDI process,
NDIN.
the notification process for NDIN. So
Okay.
in terms of a self-grass, you have to have quite a number of different components that are similar to a notification
Still need to
for
show
new
safe
diet
use.
ingredients.
Safe use.
What's that?
Still need to show safe use for both.
It's to show safe use for
Mhm.
both. Keep in mind, there is a different standard
Yeah.
within the Act as well as the GRAS process and food additive process,
Mhm.
in that an ingredient that has been concluded GRAS there must be a reasonable certainty of safety. Now, the Act itself really has a slightly lower threshold for safety. It's a reasonable expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's some word, back and forth on that, but
Yeah.
that is expectation versus certainty. There is a
One is a higher
difference
threshold.
in context.
Thinking about it.
But at the end of the day, it is, how do you show and confirm that the ingredient is safe? You do it through, as I said, through characterization of the ingredient, through specifications, showing that the ingredient is stable throughout the lifetime of sale of the ingredient or the product as a whole. And then you've got your, if you don't have history of use or use in the food at a substantial amount, then you have to do your safety studies
Mm-hmm.
to show that the ingredient is safe when consumed over an extended period of time. And that is typically with preclinical rodent studies, as well as genotoxicity studies to show that it is not potentially carcinogenic. Those are very similar in terms of what is necessary to prove safety for a grass or self-grass, as well as safety for a dietary ingredient.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate that. I think everyone will have questions, and I think the viability of certain pathways, self-grass or NDIN, is really contextual. And if you have questions about that, let us know. Reach out to us, and we can determine which one works best for you. All right, getting back on topic. I know that was a huge tangent, but one that I think we had to cover. Next question. Are there restrictions on beverages used as dietary supplements? Is there a serving size limit?
I have not found that there are restrictions on beverages used as dietary supplements. However, you do have to be very clear, and this is part of labeling.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be very clear that this is a supplement. You
Market as a dietary
market it as a dietary supplement if that is what you are intending it. I know Janelle and I both have water bottles here because a lot of talking. If you're going to market this size, a 16-ounce bottle, as a dietary supplement, you have to be very clear on the labeling. It is a supplement and for supplement use only. And the indications must be used, occasional use.
Mm-hmm.
They can't be, drink at every meal.
Yeah.
Because that ends up being more of a food, and you'll have questions. So really, it is in how you are marketing this in terms of a supplement versus a food. But when you start getting into sizes like this that are marketed as supplements, that's pushing the line in terms of, really, a supplement? I'm going to drink this as a supplement. You know, that's a good question. It's not unheard of, and I've seen them, but again, you have to be truthful and really cognizant of how you're marketing that and as a supplement.
I have so many follow-up questions for you about this. We're gonna move on. We'll talk about that offline. I already caused too many tangents. Okay, so since grass enables use of a molecule as an NDI, what would be the case when one would have to go through the NDI process rather than grass? Did you catch that?
Yes.
Okay.
Good. And many times, excuse me, it's when the molecule probably is more of a question on its safety, such that if there's questions concerning the molecule and whether it is synthetic or not, or extracted, there's been a lot of questions concerning, even if it's found in food, is it a natural component of food or constituent?
Okay.
There's a few exceptions to when synthetic ingredients can be defined as dietary ingredients. Vitamins is one. It's been very well documented that synthetic vitamins have been utilized prior to 1994, and they have been produced as such, as a synthetic. But FDA very much has held ground to the fact that synthetic or identical, however you want to call that, synthetic identical to natural constituents are not necessarily appropriate for use in dietary supplements, even if they are grass. Because that, as I said, it goes back to, is it a vitamin, mineral, herb, or botanical amino acid, something from a natural constituent of the diet? So as you're concentrating and extracting, you're starting to become more of a synthetic aspect. So even though it is grass, if there's questions on its use, on its claims, FDA may want to see it.
Yeah.
And they may request a notification.
I guess that's always the caveat with grassed dietary ingredients.
Yes.
FDA can always ask. So
They can
you
always
may as well make sure your
request
safety
information.
is in line with making sure it's really supporting safety.
Yes.
Okay, next question. What guidelines can you recommend to determine whether a product should be packaged with a child-resistant closure? Our current internal practice is typically gummy products due to it being a choking hazard. Do you have any additional recommendations?
This becomes very much I wouldn't say a hot topic, but a critical topic within FDA in general, because they have in the past been very concerned about food substances as well as dietary supplements being a choking hazard.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I believe the question was concerning a wrap.
No. It was a product. Well, it wasn't specified what type of product, but
Right.
they were talking
packaging.
about gummies
Right.
that could be a choking hazard. There was not specification on the type of packaging.
Okay, so really, you can almost have it as and I've seen this before concerning a warning label concerning potential choking hazard. Nobody likes to put a
warning label.
Yes, nobody likes to put a warning label on anything. However, if there is a concern, if it's the right size, the diameter, the viscosity of the gummy bear or the gummy, such that it could be lodged in an infant or young child's throat, the FDA has in the past made comments of saying there should be some sort of indication of, either a statement, this may cause choking hazard, or the right packaging. There could be a packaging as well.
So the type of packaging they did specify, and I missed it, was child-resistant closure. I don't know if that means something to you.
Yes.
So probably like the pressing down type, or making sure you line things up. Does that sound about like child-resistant closure to you?
Yes, that would be a major step forward in
Okay.
being able to address that without a warning statement. However, you may want to state something to the effect of not for consumption by young children, or some children under 3, or whatever the case may be.
And from a safety perspective, is there any recommendation of when you should implement that kind of measure?
Well, you should actually evaluate that prior to commercialization.
Okay.
So you really should look at that early on in the process, in terms of size, in terms of
Okay.
consistency, and anything. There was a situation, now it's many years ago, but of these little gel packs, and they were a little circular, kind of like a K-cup size, a little bit smaller, and they were gelatin type, and they were choke hazards, and that was a huge issue, such that FDA is very much in tune with gummies or other things that are slightly larger than those that could be a choke hazard for small children. So in the same vein, you want to say not for small children, not for children under 3, or have the tamper-resistant or child-resistant packaging.
It's almost like if it's attractive to young kids, if a young kid would find it and confuse it with something else.
And have ready access to it.
Access.
That's the other issue.
Yeah. So there's not really regulation of that. It's almost like if you think there's a chance that could happen, just be very careful.
Within DSHEA and within the Dietary Supplement Network, there isn't a actual regulation that I can recall on it. That's something that I don't often deal with, but it's just food in general. And food ingredients in general, that's where that comes in.
And they're really trying to find some guidance on that, but it seems like it's a little outside regulations and almost like a R&D focus group type thing where they figure that out internally.
For the most part, yes.
All right, this is a longer question, so it sounds like your voice needs a break. Drink some water and while I read this question. All right, we just touched on dietary supplements that are in conventional food forms, such as gummies, jelly beans, soft chews, etc. How does FDA view these forms? Would they have issues? Is this acceptable as long as manufacturers have reasonable serving size and not resulting in significant intake of calories and added sugars? So it's really about the form of the supplement. Like, how does FDA view it?
FDA is very much cognizant of those dietary supplements that look like food.
Yeah.
That is a big issue. And many times they are pushing forth information and guidance documents and other documentation of saying, not only is it the labeling on the product itself, you have to be very clear, very blatant in terms of the labeling, saying that it is a dietary supplement. The use indications on the back is supplement use, intended use and number of servings per day and things like that, and how much to consume. Many times that's also where it states, for adult use only, if it is, that type of thing, but also where it is marketed. And this is where what I have read and what I've heard FDA and saying as well. Many times a lot of dietary supplements are now being marketed in grocery stores. Yeah. So it's where on the shelving, if the grocery store, the Mega Mart puts dietary supplements next to candy section or something along those, because it looks like a jelly bean or a gummy bear or something like that. That's something that the dietary supplement manufacturer distributor has to be aware of where it is being marketed, because it needs to have its own shelf. It needs to have its own space.
You don't want it to get confused with something,
exactly.
Especially for, remember, the choking hazard type thing. You gotta make sure that it's very explicit and very sure that this is a supplement, dietary supplement, not candy. People get that confused. I ate a lot of those as a child because I got my vitamins that way. It's a good thing, I guess. But for some folks, it might not meet exactly what they're looking for.
Exactly. You want to be very clear and very upfront in terms of how this is being marketed, the labelings clearly stating dietary supplement,
and it's
only,
positioned in a market that it is,
and it is positioned in the right space.
Okay. All right, moving on. Is it correct that if a material A uses similar production process and similar specification to material B that has been self-affirmed GRAS with a GRN and no objection letter, so it's been a notified GRAS, material B, and it is going to be used in the same applications and limitations on the GRN, that material A could also be considered GRAS? In other words, can a supplier of an ingredient piggyback on another supplier's GRAS notification? Fun question.
In certain cases, if it is utilizing the same manufacturing process, that has been a big issue as well. Keep in mind that for GRAS ingredients, as well as for new dietary ingredients or dietary ingredients in general, it's not just the actual end product. There's also a concern as to any constituents that are left over or degradation products that were formed through the manufacturing process, such that there would be a concern. There was a case not too long ago, and I wish I could remember the actual aspects of it, in which a dietary ingredient was being produced by a company and had an NDIN, and a second company was using a different manufacturing process, but meeting the same specifications for that dietary ingredient. But that manufacturing process was different, such that there was a metabolite being formed that was actually toxic. And so that caused problems such that you weren't following the same manufacturing processes and safeguards within those manufacturing processes. So it's not just the end product, it's also the manufacturing process. If that's the same, if the standards are held similar, then I think the company for ingredient M, the first one, A, could do a substantial equivalence GRAS, such that you say, okay, we have outlined this, we have outlined the specifications. Our manufacturing processes through a FOIA or through the evaluation of the GRAS notification, they are very similar. We have looked at the similar issues and have determined that we are producing the same product. Therefore, the same safety information can be utilized to substantiate the safety of ours. So you can piggyback to a certain extent, but you still have to have that type of documentation and confirmation for FDA and others to realize that you've done your due diligence. You've really gone down that path. You've looked at things and you've made sure that your product is safe based on everything that you've looked at.
Okay, so it's still a GRAS, it's GRAS differently, but you still have that safety argument. But the argument is, this is substantially similar because we've done our due diligence in the manufacturing process, specifications, characterizations, they're the same.
Exactly.
So there should be no safety concerns, especially if we use it safe use.
Exactly.
So one more question, would you recommend, well, first of all, this needs to go through an expert panel, correct?
I would prefer that it goes through an expert panel. If not, then all that information and the actual information that you utilize, all those specifications, all the stability, the characterization, the manufacturing process should be published. Okay. Because at the end of the day,
still going through the legitimate GRAS channels. You treat it as a GRAS.
Yes, you treat it as a GRAS. Okay. And that because that information must also be publicly available to meet the generally recognized standard. And that in that way, you've got all that information, that understanding. A GRAS panel substitutes or is proxy for general recognition of understanding how things were done, they were done appropriately, and they are standing in for the scientific community in many instances. When you don't have that, then you've got issues with who has looked at whether it's being consumed at the same level, whether the specifications are actually appropriate and you can meet those specifications, those types of things. So you have to publish that to meet that general recognition standard.
Fantastic. I actually, really quick, would you recommend that someone just to self-affirm it, or get through the expert panel, or notify this to FDA, or is that contextual? What do you think for this type of grass?
I've seen a lot of yeah, at least going through the notification, grass notification website. And yes, I'm very boring. I do look at grass notifications and read them in depth.
We're boring for you. We'll do that for you.
I do look at those, and I do see that a lot of people do state, or a significant number do state, because my ingredient is X, Y, and Z, and it does follow similar specifications, therefore I can utilize the safety studies that were done by, Smith et al. 1992. Yeah. So in that way, people are already doing that. They're already utilizing safety information that was done. You're talking about going a step further and talking about an ingredient that was already grasped by another company. I see no problem with doing that, and no FDA wouldn't have an issue with providing that information, and stating, yes, it's a substantial equivalent to what has already been notified. So really it comes down to what you as a company and your company requires in order to sell your product.
Oh yeah.
Because many times companies and larger companies really want to know if FDA would be on board with what you've done and how you've done your safety assessment, such that 6 months, 2 years down the road, they wouldn't be getting a warning letter from FDA saying, show us our grass and we don't believe it, so you've got to pull all this and pull all these products. That's never a good thing to see on the news. So really the notification process in many aspects is to have assurance that FDA is going to agree with your assessment. So if that's the case, and if you need that, go through the notification process, definitely.
A lot of grass, and pardon my use of this, but it is a lot of a credibility game. It's really context dependent, and you really need to win over the person that's reviewing the grass, be it FDA or expert panelists, or the company that you're planning to sell to.
Exactly.
Credibility. Make sure that it's done well. Make sure that it has all the information you need to have a strong argument for safety.
Or even the public, the consumer as well. If you would state to the consumer that FDA had no objection to this ingredient to be utilized in these products, that can actually go a long way to promoting consumer confidence in what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's something that I've realized in my time here. Credibility, make sure you don't lose the trust of people reviewing your data. Okay, so next question is going to be, when a grass food additive having maximum usage limitations under various categories is added to a dietary supplement, would the usage limit for dietary supplements defer to the limit listed under other food categories? Make sense? You want me to read that again?
Read that again.
Yes. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna read that again. When a grass ingredient having maximum usage limitations under various categories is added to a dietary supplement, would the usage limit for the dietary supplements defer to the limit listed under other food categories? I think this is in terms of the consumption categories specified within the grass dossier. So where does that use limit fall when using a dietary supplement?
Okay, so if there are limits on use, and the question would therefore become, why are those limits intended within those use categories? If it is because there's a palatability issue when you add it to muffins, such that the muffins, you just can't go any higher, or else there's
I see.
Palatability
versus safety.
Yeah,
that's where you're going.
That's what I'm going, because within the dossier, typically you don't say this is safe for use in muffins at this level. This is safe for use in crackers at this level. This is safe for use in beverages at this level. You typically state at the end of the dossier, this is safe for overall consumption when added to certain levels at this total amount.
As consumed.
What's that?
Estimated daily consumption.
Estimated daily consumption as assumed.
Yeah.
So typically when that occurs, FDA is looking at the safety of the ingredient as consumed, as defined within the GRAS.
Mhm.
So on the one hand, I would say, you know, if you're putting this into a other ingredient category of gummy bears, I'm utilizing that way too much today, but
We all are.
then, and your dietary supplement reflects that in those use levels, that would be the best method to show that people that would be consuming this dietary supplement would likely be consuming it at similar levels to what would be consumed by that use category.
Mm-hmm.
But in evaluating that a little bit more, you think the overall day-to-day intake, you know, the aggregate consumption level, the estimated daily intake, is a better predictor of how FDA would be looking at how much would be going into a dietary supplement.
Rather than a specified category.
Rather than a classified category,
it's more
it
so
would be the
about
aggregate consumption level or the estimated daily intake.
And I guess that means that the company who's doing this or asking that question needs to understand how much their supplement's going to be consumed on a day-to-day basis so they can come up with that number.
Well, this is more on the GRAS side.
Okay.
On the GRAS side is the estimated daily intake for a daily intake. All right. So your dietary supplement is the indications of intake is per day. Take 3 per day, or do not exceed more than 2 servings per day. So your servings per day on your dietary supplement should mirror or be below the estimated daily intake as defined within your GRAS.
No, that's what I was
So,
implying.
yeah.
I must not have come up the same way, but that's the idea I was coming across. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on. If an ingredient has been self-GRASed under a specific food category, can that GRAS limit be applied to dietary supplement for nutritional purposes? It's almost similar to what we just talked about, but
yes,
I'd say that
it can be applied.
Exactly.
Yeah, as long as it's below
Yeah.
what the GRAS is for, the amount.
Yeah.
There's been back and forth as questions early on in terms of, well, is it in addition to the GRAS? You know, let me rephrase that. There were questions before in the GRAS process when looking at dietary supplements. When you have a similar or the same ingredient in both, do you look at the safety of both? You look at how much was safe on the GRAS side, and the dietary supplement or dietary ingredient is safe at or below that level. You don't sum the two together and say that they're both safe. That's not typically the way I've seen that.
Okay. No, I think it's good to see our audience has similar questions, and I hope we answered both of them for you. Moving on. Should a future NDIN in GRAS documents include populations at risk based on the human genome? Ooh. Let me give an example. APOE4 in cognition reflect variations in plant-based esters.
Okay.
Spicy question.
Yes, that's when you start looking into your individual health processes and aspects. You do need to look at vulnerable populations.
Such as?
You know, well, at risk, not for, if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm looking at this more along the safety sides of things. So if you're looking at this concerning for beneficial aspects, you can definitely promote that for a specific genetic propensity.
Medical food? Would you?
I'm not talking about medical foods.
Sorry.
But there are foods for special dietary uses.
Okay.
That go along those similar lines.
Based on a specific
attribute, okay. Yes, of those.
It's beneficial for them.
Of that population that has that genetic propensity, I'll say that.
But this is talking about at-risk populations. Is there
at risk for what?
Anything based on genomes that genome deficiencies? For instance, their example here is APOE4 in cognition that could impact or could be impacted by plant-based esters?
Okay, positively impact is what I'm assuming.
I don't know. This phrase is almost like negative.
Okay, there's two ways of looking at this.
Okay.
At-risk populations, from a safety point of view, is that safety of overconsumption of these could have an adverse effect. So that's one aspect, and I don't think that's what this person is talking about.
Okay.
It's more of a genetic sequencing to see if they're predisposed, sorry.
I got you.
To having a lack of these esters. So in that case, you can market towards those populations at risk for a lack thereof to supplement their diet.
Okay, so that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. And you can do that, but also you have to look at vulnerable populations that if they cannot metabolize this ester sufficiently, that they could get a buildup of it and have an adverse effect. So you have to be very careful in terms of what you're looking for, what you're analyzing, how you're defining the question. So that's, you know, you can do that, and you can market to those populations that are vulnerable for a lack of certain esters or things of that nature. But you can't say that they are treating anything.
Okay, that's a good line to
yes,
maintain.
You've got to make sure that you're helping support and maintain a healthy cognition or healthy, but then be careful in that, you know, because you've got to substantiate those claims. And if you're too vague in your claim, that's going to make it much more difficult to substantiate that claim.
So take for instance, the relaying this or relating it specifically to grass dosaes and endiains. If there is a study out there showing the positive impacts of this explicit ingredient X for a certain population, should they include that in a grass dosay? Will that help? Will that hurt? Or should they just not include that at all?
Well, let's pull this back to an NDIN. Okay. So,
may as well.
You know, you can actually have that as a part of the NDIN package in stating these populations, you know, are lacking in this being able to metabolize or have this ester in their diet or useful. Therefore, this will help support the ester in their nutrition as a nutritional aspect.
Supplementing their diet.
Supplementing their diet.
So that could actually be useful for an NDIN.
Yes.
Maybe less so for grass.
No, it still could be for a grass. Okay. Grass is safety. The biggest portion of it is safety. You have to have a reason typically to put something into the diet, into the food. And in that way you could document that there are people that do require different areas or supplementation of the diet with a specific ester. And that still would be okay, but you still have to show the safety. The focus on grass is safety.
Okay, so it's not enough to be a cornerstone for the safe use or the NDIN, but it is supplemental information.
It's better to understand why.
Supplemental.
Yes.
Pun intended. Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure.
For products formulated for children, what type of safety data, in addition to clinical trials, can be used to demonstrate safety? Let's say there is a botanical that has a history of safety. You okay there?
No, I'm fine. I'm just thinking about this, definitely, because children are really a specific piece.
The second I said children, you took a deep breath. So this should be a good. It should be a good response. I'm excited. Let's say there's a botanical that has a history of safe use for adults. Can this data be utilized by making adjustments to that dose if we want to make it use for younger population?
Okay. All right.
All right. Let's hear it. Let's hear it, right?
Sure. As I said, the use of supplements, the characterization and ability to show that they are safe for use by children and that they have a positive impact on children. Children are not just miniature adults. So they have their own different metabolic processes in terms of some metabolic, especially very young children, obviously. They do not metabolize certain things at a similar rate as adults, such that there's a concern whether they would the new dietary ingredient would have a buildup effect. So what you really need to do, you can do this, and there's ways of explaining that the components of that ingredient, of that, the actives in the dietary supplement, are metabolized in the same fashion through the same, let's say, liver enzymes that are at the same levels and do the same rate of metabolism as adults. So you really have to do your due diligence in showing that children can still process the ingredient in the same fashion as adults.
What does that look in terms of safety data in an NDIN?
That's really a lot of
Would it be
more
clinical,
detail.
or would it be some sort of?
It can be preclinical,
Preclinical.
but it also has to rely a lot on publications of the basic aspects of child-based metabolism
Okay.
and excretion and absorption.
So that is probably the
that.
most important component, is taking a look at the metabolism of
Yes.
that population group children
Mm-hmm.
with that specific type of ingredient. Would you have to go that far?
You really would. You'd have
Okay.
to go through that specific type of ingredient and showing that components of that ingredient would be metabolized in the same fashion. That doesn't mean that FDA wouldn't come back and say, do you have anything of a study or a clinical trial in kids just to see how it's tolerated? They could ask for that. They could. But for the first step, you really have to be very clear on how it's metabolized, how it's excreted, what is going on through that whole process to build a strong report in saying, yes, we believe that this would be safe for children.
And so
you could also have a additional uncertainty factor. That occurs as well in terms of, let's say you find an ingredient is safe at 2,000 mg per kg body weight per day, and you apply a uncertainty factor of 50 to have the new dietary ingredient notification. It'd rather be 100 or something like that. So it'd be down to 20 mg per kg per day. Now, if you want to give it to kids on the same mg per kg body weight per day basis type of mentality, you may actually want to give it, instead of at 20, at 5 or something like that, so that there's that extra layer of comfort that that's not going to be an issue with children.
So being very conservative with your dosage is as possible.
You have to be very conservative. You've got to also show that it wouldn't have long-term adverse effects to growing bodies, which may actually mean a study done in a preclinical study done in neonatal rats or something.
No, that's where I thought you were going with that.
That's another thing if you can't answer those questions that I talked about previously.
No, I think that's really good information to know, and I think especially when it comes to those vulnerable populations, you really need to do your due diligence and be very careful with what you're trying to market to these populations. Mm-hmm. And that goes without saying too, if it's also those at-risk populations, you bet FDA is going to be paying a little more attention to that. So you better come in there with a plan.
And it's very much dependent on the ingredient as well.
Okay.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're at our last question. We're almost out of time. Thank you so much for everyone's participation. Let's hit the last question and wrap things up. Would FDA accept safety assessments conducted by other regulatory agencies like Health Canada or EU EMA to establish safe usage limits for excipients in dietary supplements, specifically excipients?
Specifically excipients. It's my understanding, and I've heard this from FDA before, that they do not just carte blanche accept an approval from another regulatory agency.
I don't think they should.
So they do state that provide us the data that was utilized to substantiate that decision. Is that available? Does FDA have enough information from that decision and the data that let's say EFSA or the EU in general, do they have enough data to evaluate such that FDA would agree with that conclusion?
Still reviewing. It's not necessarily recycling the decision. It's more taking a look at what was used and what was reviewed and having FDA review.
Correct. You can't just write down, here's this decision, FDA, there it is. you really have to go through and explain and make sure you detailed out what was the basis of that conclusion by Health Canada or the EU.
As it's an excipient, maybe it has history in use in food, maybe they do a GRAS, but they'd likely still have to do that process for that excipient. Would you say that?
If it has not been used in the United States, yes.
Okay.
It should be pretty straightforward, but again, I think that would be required to show that it's safe for use in the US.
Okay, well, I think that wraps it up. That's a good note. I don't know about you, but I learned quite a bit today. So it's fun talking with Ray and Dr. Burdock and our consulting staff here. And so on behalf of our audience and our team, thank you for your time, Ray. It's been a good experience, and we hope everyone found it helpful. As a reminder, if you did not answer your questions during today's Q&A, we will follow up and provide a response via email. If you have another question or would like to speak with one of our experts, please send an email to info@burdockgroup.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. If we didn't answer your question, we'll get back to you. So before we go off, we actually have another event coming up on May 27th at 3 p.m. EST. Dr. Burdock will be presenting on insect as a food ingredient. So if that interests you, please sign up, please join us. We're always excited to have you guys here. And if you have conversation topics or questions or something that you'd like to learn about, please let us know. We're always listening and we're always here to help. With that, have a wonderful weekend, and stay safe.
Thank you.